Aloha and welcome to Honolulu Cop for You, where we will discuss a current event topic and offer an opinion that just might get you to think a little deeper and perhaps consider a different viewpoint. This is episode 3, part 2 of the discussion, Growing Up Catholic. Remember, part 1 ended with the realization imposed upon us in grade school that God was stern, inflexible, and downright dangerous. But he loved us, or so we were constantly told. However, from an early age, I wondered at, opposed even, the practice which I observed my mother and other Catholics perform: praying to a ceramic statue. It was a statue, for Christ's sake. Of course, I realized that it simply represented Jesus or some dead saint, but isn't that carrying things a little too far? It was as though that lump of clay actually embodied the essence or soul of a deity. Well, I much preferred to envision praying in an inviting, beautiful, and majestic scene of nature, but wait now. God, at that time of my life, wasn't serene or inviting. Try to understand this. Monotheism isn't truly monotheism. It has its roots in polytheism, where people believed in many gods. People would pray to the rain god or to the god of crops. As the church developed 1,000 years ago, or even longer, along came the saints. The saints took the place of the many gods of polytheism. So in the Catholic Church, instead of praying to many gods, you prayed to saints. If you were depressed or if you had a mental illness, you prayed to Saint Dipthia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If you had cancer, you prayed to Saint Peregrine. If you wanted to protect your children from harm, there were 3 saints you could pray to: Saint Alodia of Huesca, or Saint Lufhild, or Saint Germain. And on and on and on. There was a saint for everything. It follows then that God bestowed godly powers upon the saints. Now, didn't that make them deities? And in order to become a saint, you needed to convince God to perform a miracle. So, as a saint, you had a lot of power. Polytheism. Saints. May the God of podcasts grant me more listeners. Praying the rosary is different from praying to a porcelain saint. It was merely a string of beads designed to keep track of the number of times you repeated your prayers. Which begs the question, why so much repetition? Not only for the rosary, but in penance that you were given by a priest in confession. Confession is yet again another strict rule we were required to observe. Before you could receive communion at Mass, you had to confess your sins of the previous week to a priest. You sometimes had to wait in line where everyone could see that you were a sinner. And when it was your turn, you climbed into a cramped phone booth-like box and spoke to a priest who seemed to hide behind a muted curtain. He probably had something to hide. After you confessed, the priest would then issue your punishment, requiring you to repeat 3 Hail Marys or half a dozen Lord prayers. The real kicker, however, occurred in the 1960s. I remember this clearly. Someone decided that it would be better to kneel face to face with the priest in the openness of the church for everyone to see and possibly overhear. He sat in a chair, you knelt before him, and openly confessed your sins. What? Nope, not gonna happen, didn't happen, won't ever happen. Never been to a confession since, so I don't know if they brought the box back or not. Well, my early education left me with those experiences and a jaded view of Catholicism. Then I went to college, which really impacted my view of the Catholic Church. College tends to open people's eyes, and attending the University of Hawaii in the late 1960s and early 1970s began the process of expanding my knowledge to the world beyond the peasant life I was so accustomed to. First of all, I realized that at that time in my life, the church opposed gay people. The church opposed bisexual people. The church opposed transsexual people. But wait. I had a couple of friends who were gay, and they were really good people. Were they not going to heaven because they were gay? Oh man, that's not right. And after all these years, in an ever-growing and evolving world, the Catholic Church has not really changed its position on gay people in spite of Pope Francis's comments about inclusion. In fact, the Church's basic opposition to LGBT people probably serves to develop and support negative opinions in the mind of Catholics that LGBT people are flawed somehow in God's eye. Bummer. I took a course at the University of Hawaii in 1970 that examined the religions of the world. It opened my eyes even further. It dawned on me then that the Catholic Church, in addition to being a religious entity, was also a very political one, with conservative and liberal leaders in the form of cardinals who ruled over geographic areas. I learned that there was internal fighting, coalitions, and cardinals trying to push their beliefs above everyone else. I also learned that many cardinals actually oppose the Pope and his policies. The Pope, incidentally, is actually just a religious equivalent to a CEO of a large company. Even today, and even in recent news, Pope Francis's open mind on many issues is strongly opposed by traditional Catholics, cardinals, and bishops who have publicly resisted suggestions for change. This reminds me of the partisanship practices of the U.S. Senate and Congress and the all too often infighting between the executive and legislative branches of government. Later in the course, our professor went into detail about the Crusades, which were sponsored by the church. Suddenly, it became a reality for me that the church back then had an army of mercenaries who went to war against the people of the Eastern Mediterranean in order to recover the Holy Lands from Muslim rule. This was pure and simple efforts of domination of one religion over another. In addition, historians have proven that crusaders pillaged towns and cities as they traveled like so many other oppressive armies throughout history. Remember Genghis Khan? The Crusaders left devastation in their wake. And the Crusades made many of those knights very rich men. By the end of my sophomore year at the University of Hawaii, my opinion of the Catholic Church had reached a new low, but it was about to fall even lower. I took a course on medieval history and learned about the Inquisition. You want to talk about terrorism? The Inquisition was established to suppress heresy, but it was representative of the most violent terrorist acts that mankind can imagine. During the Middle Ages, if you disagreed with the doctrine or teachings of the church, and then left the church for a splinter religion, you became a heretic and subject to investigation to rid your beliefs from the Catholic world. The main tool used by church investigators into heresy was torture. The investigators of the church used such tools as the Judas chair, a stool with a pointed pyramid on top. The victim was hung above the chair and lowered onto the point of the pyramid. Heavy weights were attached to the victim's leg, pulling him further into the pyramid. And as he was pulled further downward, the wooden pyramid ripped through his buttocks and intestines. Then there was the rack, a wooden rectangle with rollers used to stretch a victim and dislocate bones in the arms and shoulders and hips and legs. Eventually, the limbs would rip off the victim's body. There was always the standard method of extracting confessions by dunking a victim into water or boiling him in a cauldron. Torture was applied until the victim died or confessed. If he died, he was guilty, and if he confessed, he was judged guilty and then executed, usually by being burned at the stake. The ultimate lose-lose situation. It needs to be noted here that some Catholics point to the very early Roman persecution of Jesus' followers. History has shown, and this is no exaggeration, that over 4 centuries, the Romans were responsible for the deaths of about 2,000 Christians. Over the next 1,500 years, however, the Catholic Church was responsible for the slaughter of about 5 million non-Catholics. On August 23, 1572, French Catholics murdered over 10,000 Protestants in that one 24-hour period. More people were killed by the Catholics in that one day than the number of Catholics persecuted and killed by Romans over 4 centuries. I remember that as a younger man I was pestered by my wife to attend church. I jokingly told her that I'd go back to church when the Pope apologized for the Inquisition. I'd be damned, I should have shut up. On March 12, 2000, Pope John Paul II publicly asked God to forgive the Catholic Church for the sins, violence, horror, and death imposed upon the Church, on human beings during the medieval Inquisition. Then as a little older man, through the present day actually, the revelation that so many Catholic priests sexually abused thousands of young boys has become the final straw, at least for the time being. There may be other secrets and crimes committed by Catholic clergy that have not yet come to light. These priestly crimes are ultimate in hypocrisy. Not only have the offending priests been hypocritical, since their alleged calling was to bring peace and salvation to people, the crimes they committed against young boys and young men have ruined lives and in so many cases caused severe emotional and psychological problems. And just the other day, Pope Francis brought to light the reality that some priests have committed sexual abuses against nuns. This revelation caused such a large worldwide uproar that the Vatican felt the need to explain the following day. They came out with this. Oops, Francis misspoke. He was referring to sexual abuse as in male domination over women, not necessarily sexual assault. This reminds me of the Virginia governor who admitted to and apologized for wearing blackface in medical school. When the nation went ballistic on him, the following day he claimed, "Oops, mistake, that wasn't me." Too late, Bubba. Your credibility is all shot to hell. Perhaps worse than the crimes themselves was the silence by other priests, by confessors, by bishops, cardinals, perhaps even popes. So why hide these crimes? Could it be that the church felt the acknowledgement of this crime would affect the power they held over Catholics in the lay community? Did they fear people would leave the church? Was it simply embarrassment? Or was it a fear of the tremendous loss of revenue that would follow in the civil suits? Better yet, did the church take steps to protect members of their own fraternity with lies and omissions, similar to how corrupt police officers do from time to time? In the police world, it's called the Blue Wall of Silence. Remember Hogan's Heroes and Sergeant Schultz? I know nothing, nothing. As the crime spread over the entire world, it tells you something about priests in general? Does it indicate there's a major flaw in the personality of the man who would be priest? Or does it tell you there's something inherently wrong with the concept of celibacy? Other Christian sects allow marriage. They also have women priests. Why does the Catholic Church persist with this vow of celibacy? We'll try and answer those questions in part 3 of this episode, as our allotted time for this post is coming to an end. Thank you for listening, and if you liked it, please subscribe. It's free.